Sycamore State Park was a location I had been anticipating for quite a while now due to its depth and habitat. The majority of its 2,384 acres is comprised of mature forest and woodlots, meadows, and with waterways such as the Wolf Creek weaving around it. I was eager to see what nature photography opportunities arose from the state park and began my morning promptly at sunrise. Approximately 8 miles total of trail comprised this land and made for a full day of exploring and photographing. Including the horse bridle trails, it totals about 18 miles. The state park lies within vast fertile till plains of western Ohio in the Wolf Creek Valley. In researching this location prior to my visit, I learned about different kinds of Adena American Indians and Native Americans that were present at this location. Before going to this location, I found at one time the land comprising Sycamore was purchased by a development corporation to build a housing project. When the corporation was unable to complete the construction, the lands were offered to the state of Ohio, and then eventually Sycamore State Park was dedicated in November 1979. Alright, so after about an hour and a half here of hiking along the trails, I finally just decided to hunker down and just test out a photo, just to kind of really break the ice a little bit here. So I found this nice little just kind of creek flowing streams of the Wolf Creek over here. I decided to try some long exposures of the Wolf Creek here, since this is the heaviest kind of flowing water that I've seen so far here at Sycamore State Park. And I just tried some simple long exposures of it, just right on the side of the creek there. And I feel like they turn out pretty well. They're much more documentative than some of the other long exposures I've done, so they're by no means my favorite ones I've done. There's definitely much more impressive flowing waterfalls. They're actually perched in the branches of the sycamore trees right along the creeks here. So my exposure settings for the Wolf Creek photos of the long exposures, I'm typically keeping them around about the 1/5 of a second, also as well as 1/3 of a second. ISO 100 throughout the handful of photos that I made. And then from there, just kind of varying the aperture a little bit here and there, keeping around the f11 to f14 range. I found that kind of provided enough sufficient depth of field and pointed straight down across from the flowing water as it flows from right to left, and then just photographing it straight on. And then keep my point of focus as well about 1/3 of the way into the scene to kind of really achieve that maximum depth of field there. But yeah, it's a nice little scene there. Just keep it nice and simple. Kind of doing the focal range of about 16 to about 25 millimeters. I found like that worked. I feel like that worked pretty well there overall. And then yeah, just from there, just slightly adjust the composition I had my camera obviously for long exposures mounted on a tripod. Kept it very low to the ground, and really kind of emphasized, in some of the images at least, some of the foam detail that's in the foreground as well. So as you can tell, it's going to be a very sunny blue sky day, which is a little bit of unfortunate, but because any new to me location, I like to have a nice, nice good lighting, nice diffused lighting throughout the day, just so I could photograph freely. We'll see how today goes. There's a couple of blooming spring ephemerals, which just really early spring kind of wildflowers and plants that I'm seeing here, as well as some kind of yellow buttercups, which is a really small plant that grows in these nice clumps and clusters, and I'm seeing a lot of them so far in these nice big patches of greenery that are along the trails here. So I may search around, see if I can find maybe the best, the fully bloom one. I will say one of the nice things about sunny days like this is that wildflowers of any kind of sort, they typically prefer to bloom when there's nice amounts of sun that they really just need and crave. So a nice sunny day like this will mean that they're more likely to sprout and bloom. So going to be looking for, like I said, the best ones that are already kind of just stretched out their flower petals, and then photograph them accordingly, of course. And then yeah, probably do it in macro style, get some variety of angles there. But I'm going to keep along the trails here, and then search for, like I said, wildflowers or pretty much anything of that sort. Alright, so I found this decent stand of fig buttercups. This nice little grouping of them. All these are fully bloomed, simply because they're facing towards the rising sun over here, and they look quite spectacular. They have this kind of glossy, kind of wet sheen to the yellow flower petals that I think will hopefully translate over pretty well, I think, as long as those little highlights from the sun right beside me here doesn't overblow out. And so I'm thinking about using some various different kinds of equipment, stuff that it's a little less common for me to use, but I feel like it'd work out well in this case. At least in the common things side of things, I'm going to use a tripod probably, just to simply stabilize the entire image, since I have this very long macro setup here. Since I'm using an extension tube, and I'm using a really long, or a telephoto lens, I feel like I need to, it's pretty much imperative that I stabilize it, just because hand holding it like this with this really long lens, the longer the lens really, the more camera shake, so that's going to be a little bit of a difficulty here, but I feel like it's something I'm going to try here. And then not only that, but I have this little kind of telephone cord attachment that goes on the camera hot shoe on the DSLR, and this is basically an extension cord that you can mount to an external flash, something like this. And so it just kind of creates this little pieces of the puzzle. So you mount the one end that also kind of looks like a hot shoe, just like the DSLR. You lock that in place, click it and lock it, and then you take the receiver end and then put that onto camera hot shoe, and simply like that. And just kind of, and what this does is that it allows you more freedom and range of movement when using an external flash, to angle it, position it as well, any way you want, as long as, at least in this case, since it's a wired one, as long as you don't yank it around or whatever, especially during mid shutter capture, that would introduce camera shaking. And fortunately enough, they also make wireless models as well that have basically the same kind of setup, really, essentially just without the wire. So you have some sort of receiver or slave unit that goes on top of the camera hot shoe, and then you just have a other kind of receiving end on the bottom of the external flash, and it pretty much fulfills the same job there. But in this case, I only have a wired one at the moment, so I'm going to use this, like I said, mounted on a tripod, and then just angle the flash in any which way. And you may be thinking, why would I use an external flash when I have all the sunlight directly overhead that would easily overexpose if I'm not careful? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my back positioned and facing away from the buttercups, and I feel like that's it's going to diffuse the light a lot more and basically shadow over the entire frame that I'm going to capture here with the camera. So essentially like that, it's almost like I'm filtering out the natural light ahead, and then I'm just using a small little pop of artificial light to just kind of fill in the shadow details there. And yeah, basically I'm just controlling the light and the way I want to, and to make an even exposure photograph. So I'm going to get started here photographing these buttercups, and hoping the results turn out pretty well. I think they will.
Photographing this buttercup once again proved that shooting under midday light doesn't have to be flat and boring. You have to learn to work with what you have, cropping and zooming in close to avoid sharing too much light, or blocking it out with your own makeshift lens hoods like I use my hat.
Alright, so my little photo session here with the fig buttercups, it's been going pretty well actually. I've been photographing a variety of different vertical and horizontal orientations, just with simply using the L bracket to flip and adjust the DSLR camera here. And a good thing about that is if I ever use these, let's say these set of images, or single image for let's say a magazine cover or a 2-page spread, you have some options to work with directly with the publisher. And you have some negative blank space for some kind of type or kind of copy, and some fonts or logos or any kind of stuff like that. And so I've been doing different kinds of angles and stuff like that, and then just finding ways to really work with the lighting overhead to kind of have it enough in there to fill both with and without the external flash here. At the moment I don't have it attached, but I'm also using my hat to simply block out the light that's being poured through from the sun. And I've actually been finding that works pretty well. At first I was using my hands, but I feel like the hat, just because of how much bigger it is and easier to move around, and I can free up both of my hands to work the different kind of camera dials and settings there. Basically the hat works as almost like as a lens hood in order to make just a giant shadowed area, and then that way I can meter and expose simply for the center of the buttercup there. But yeah, these photos have been turned out pretty well. I'm really liking them so far. I'm probably going to take a handful more and then continue on the trail here. Alright, keeping in line with photographing these spring ephemeral flowers here, we get some other kind of early bloomers like trout lily, which is this little yellow, almost kind of star-shaped triangular kind of flower. It has looks like multi-flowering kind of leaves on it that sprout out. Looks like in hairs or something, and it's a nice vibrant yellow. There's a couple of them on the side of the trail here. And there's also some white flowers beside me here. There's a few more of those than, let's say, the trout lilies, but I think they're anemones or some kind of white kind of early spring wildflower here, and they're very beautiful. Those look fully bloomed just because of they're in a nice position right here with just to get the really nice full sunlight and the full coverage there. And so I've been photographing both of them respectively. The trout lilies, just because they're kind of more eccentric shapes, I'm finding a little bit more difficulty with, but I'm trying to make it work here. And then I'm actually having a lot more luck, photographically at least, with these white flowers, and just covering, like, it's pretty much the same as the buttercups, covering up the shadow areas using my hat or whatever, some kind of a lens shade or lens hood, and then just photographing it as such, and then experiment with using external flash. And yeah, the results are looking very, very nice. I'm just using the same setup pretty much, a 75-300 mounted on a tripod, and just working with that. And then I also wanted to mention actually is minimum focusing distance. Every lens has a point in which you can get as close as you can to the subject and it'll be able to autofocus. So every lens has a minimum, obviously, of how close you can get to the subject. Well, if you use a macro lens, or let's say an extension tube like I am here, obviously it's going to draw you in more, and no matter what kind of lens focal length or type you have, it'll allow you to focus even closer than what would typically be the normal minimum focusing distance on that lens. So just something to keep in mind, and that's the main reason why I do macro, as well as for these floral subjects or any kind of bugs or insects or butterflies, anything that's really, really small, is of course to fill the frame. So from here I'm going to keep along the trail and look for other kind of blooming early spring wildflowers or any kind of plant life. Birds are pretty much quieted down for the day, at least until later this evening, unfortunately, just because of it's just midday, so they're usually resting for now. But if any of them pop up, any kind of rarities or uncommons that are early migrators, of course I'll photograph them if I'm able to, and then yeah, we'll just see how the rest of the state park checks out. Alright, I finally make my way back. And Sycamore State Park, it's a bit of an oddity. It kind of reminds me of Buck Creek State Park in a number of ways. I think they're about relatively the same size, I believe. Buck Creek, though, comprises a much, much larger lake than the smaller lake and pond that I saw at the beginning of the day where I parked here at Sycamore. But the problem is the trails on both of them are kind of confusing, and they're both interwoven with horse bridle trails as well as just regular hiking trails. And so the problem with that is you just can, there's signs up and there's signage pretty much everywhere, just about, and it's at good lengths throughout the trail, like any good hiking trail should have. But I don't know, I just couldn't find the right spot sometimes, and eventually I hopped on the bridle trail, and I was like, well, what am I doing on here? Because you can clearly tell, it's night and day difference compared to this much more dirt path. I got a variety of photos, mainly macro photographs of spring ephemeral flowers, of course. But I also did some simple kind of landscapes, some wide angle stuff. There's quite a few number of pine woods actually that are kind of just sprinkled throughout the entire state park here, and I wanted to try something that was really, really wide. It's kind of like a little bit of a cliche composition to do, but I stuck my camera on the ground, pointed straight up at the 16mm range, which is very wide, at least wider than most would consider, and I had it point straight up, and I just simply put on a 2-second timer and allowed it to prop up and stand up on its own without me hand holding it or anything. And I took the photograph there, and it's nice. It's like I said, it's a little bit of a cliche composition, but I very much enjoyed it. I think it turned out pretty well. It reminds me of some older photographs I've done at some previous locations of pine forests, but this one's much wider, and it has kind of the tree branches of the coniferous trees are kind of creeping in towards the center of the image there, and it kind of just opens up in this kind of circle at the center of the image there. So it kind of breaks the rule of thirds a little bit, but I mean, that's okay. And I had a nice blue sky with it, of course, and the coniferous tree the trunks, the bark, slightly underexposed, but obviously you can adjust that in post to some degree. So other than that, I really haven't taken much else in the way of photographs. Done some with Virginia spring beauties. Those are another gorgeous, really small kind of wildflower that we see early in spring. And so now that I'm on my way back, pretty much no one out here as well, which is kind of surprising, but at least for a state park. But once again, it's kind of like Buck Creek in that regard, because I really, in my times hiking at Buck Creek, I never really saw anyone else. It is very, very hot today. I'm not really quite used to it yet. Now it's just early spring and directly in the middle of the day, so the sun's just very, it's making me sweat quite a bit, and I'm not quite acclimated to it, at least for the season and this year. But right now I'm on the Ghost Hedge Trail, the south one. I was on the northbound one until I made it to the kind of stopping point really at the other side of the state park. But now I'm going to hike the however many miles back, and then we'll meet back up there. But for now I'm going to turn you off and focus on hiking and making it back to the trailhead in the parking lot on the other side of the state park, where I started for the day. But yeah, it's been a nice day out. I really enjoyed all the different wildflowers and everything else that I photographed. And it's a very nice big location that really lives up to its name, quite literally, for just how many sycamores are here. But anyways, I'm gonna continue hiking here, and we'll catch you back at the trailhead. Alright guys, I'm at the exit here for Sycamore State Park. It's been a great day out. I'm really tired and sweaty, but I got some amazing photos I think to edit here, and a nice big video that I can share with you guys my experience here, at least my first visit. So thank you so much for watching guys. This has been Sycamore State Park, and until next time, make sure to get out here. Thank you.